Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to our Craven College family. We are here with some special guests today. We are talking about grief in our Let's Talk series. Grief is something that we all will visit at some point in time. Many of us have already visited it several times in our lifetimes, and it will not be the last time. So we're going to talk more about that. But first, I want to introduce to you some actually friends. I know these people. I've had dealings with these people, laughed with these people, and cried sometimes with these people. And so it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you today two of my friends from the past who, and I'll let them tell you everything that they want to tell you about themselves. Gail, if you would like to go first, please. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Gail Bestburg. I am a trauma therapist and clinical supervisor over at Promise Place. And I have some experience with grief personally and professionally. Before I came to work at Promise Place, I was a hospice social worker. So I dealt with a lot of families who were experiencing grief and going through the bereavement process. And so I am fortunate enough today to have with me a Bachelor of Social Work intern from East Carolina University, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hello, I am Hayley Rhodes, and I'm an undergraduate student at ECU, and I'm majoring in social work. I'm hopefully soon to go to get my master's degree, and I'm waiting to hear back on that. And then I would like to one day be a LCSW or get my license clinical social work. And so I'm not experienced totally, but I'm happy to be learning from this awesome internship experience and to be sitting here talking to you guys today.
Yes, we're glad to have you both. And just so everybody knows, Haley and I went to New Bern High School together. I was a senior, of course, and she was a freshman, right? When I say senior, I mean like senior citizen, not like senior. But I was a counselor at New Bern, and Haley was a student.
It
And
was the best.
we were talking about how wonderful it is to see those in our community who have grown up and have become adults and professional adults and seeking to give back to the community and join us in the community working with folks. And so that makes us all happy to see you doing that, Haley. And Gail, you've joined us before. We've done some events back pre-COVID when we could actually get on campus and bring people together in a room and talk about mental health issues, which are so very important. And of course, COVID has only increased the need to speak about mental health issues because of the stress that COVID has brought, which lends itself to anxiety and depression and grief, of course. In the whole process. So let's just throw out grief real quick and what it is so that we can conceptualize it, begin to discuss it a little bit. The natural and expected response. And this isn't in the dictionary, in Webster's anyway. It's kind of a collaboration of different ways to look at grief. But what I see it as is the natural and expected response when someone or something that we love, that we value, that we need has been removed or taken away from us. And that would be called loss. So when we lose something valuable to us, we create the grief. And grief is our reaction, our response, our adjustment to this loss and the change that it brings in our lives. Does that kind of capture it pretty well?
That captures it very well. And during COVID, sometimes funerals are being held virtually rather than in person, which can add some stress and discomfort to those who are grieving the loss of a loved one.
I also think with COVID as well, because your definition was inclusive to loss and not, because sometimes grief, you can just assume that it's about death. But I think with COVID, like we've all lost like a sense of security and safety. And I think that's something we've all been grieving together as well. And outside of just the realm of someone dying. So
yeah, it's been a change in our way of life.
Definitely.
So yeah, let's just go ahead and get specific about all the occasions that lead us to this journey of grief that we're talking about. And obviously we've mentioned death, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a friend, the loss of somebody important in our lives, death. What are some of the other more specific things that will trigger this grief response that we can think of? And Hayley, you alluded to it, just changing our normal lifestyles. But there are other things, kind of mile markers in our lives that create the grief process. We'll just kind of make a list of them.
Yeah. So, as odd as it sounds, a change of job can bring about grief. Beginning or ending your education can bring on grief. I know when I got my master's, there were 2 other students that I hung with every day, and I wasn't going to be seeing them anymore every day. And I wasn't having the routine experiences that I had over the past 2 years. So I really felt, I really felt a sense of grief. Even something like gaining a new family member can create a sense of grief. Retirement.
I think new phases of our life as well can trigger new senses of loss or grief too. So like me personally, the phase of life that I'm in right now, I'm grieving losing my college friends to COVID, basically. Not to COVID, but like I didn't get to spend my last semester with them in Greenville, or I didn't get like a proper graduation, or I'm not going to get a proper graduation.
Yes.
And then like maybe in a few years, a decade, maybe like, depending on your age or what your circumstances is, like a death of a spouse or a divorce or anything. Like, so I think we all go through different phases and definitions of grief as we kind of grow up and experience different kinds of loss.
Yes. And for each person, it's going to be an individual experience.
Exactly.
Just like trauma is an individual experience. What might traumatize me might not traumatize Hayley. What might be a cause of grief for Hayley may not be a cause of grief for me.
Yeah, grief definitely looks different on everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking of last spring, talking about high school and graduation, Hayley, for college students. And Hayley, you're closer to that time in your life than Gail and I are, but I felt bad for high school seniors, right? Last year,
Yes.
The prom, not being able to have a prom and not being able to have all those traditions in your senior year for those who played sports, athletics, cheerleading, ROTC, just all the various things that your senior year you look so forward to doing.
And it can seem so minimal. It can seem so minimal from like someone who, like, it's all relative, but like compared to someone who just lost a loved one to COVID, and then like here we are crying about not getting a graduation. But like that's what I mean by different definitions of grief. Like I am and was grieving, like losing that big milestone in my life, but to somebody else, that's not a big deal compared to like losing a loved one, which I would agree, but like everyone grieves differently and everyone is grieving something.
I'll tell you, one of the most memorable grief experiences that I had is I grew up in rural West Virginia, and my dad was a pastor, and it was a very small community, and the church was my family. I didn't have aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins. I didn't have that kind of biological family, and the church family filled those gaps and filled those spaces for me. So I turned 18, went off to college, and after that year, my parents moved. My father got a different position and moved several counties away. And the house that I grew up in, the family that I grew up with, was no longer there. And that was a huge loss for me.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it because I was in college and, I was distracted by so many things. But in reflection, it really took me a long time to get through losing that family and that sense of family, that sense of who I was. My identity was really in that town and in that church and in that community. And so that was impactful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And change,
and I
definitely.
Certainly relate to that as well, because I moved away from home at an early age. I was 18 when I moved away from home, and I never moved back again. But my grandmother is what really drew us all back. And then once she passed, I had a cousin who, because we had cousins that were just scattered to the wind, but one cousin who was still there in the old home place kind of drew everybody in and kept everybody connected and together. And unfortunately, she passed away at a relatively young age. And so, not only did we lose her, but we kind of lost the glue that held the rest of us together.
And that really changes the dynamic of the family. And it's back to that whole concept of when we lose something, things change. And that's on multiple levels that they change.
Absolutely.
So let's, looks like we're getting another visitor in here. I was looking for Kelly all of a sudden, but then somebody else popped in. I'm going to stop it for a second.
Okay.
Hi, Sharia. Tell us about it, Sharia.
Well, my name is Dr. Sharia Brown. I am here with Promise Place. I've been here right about 5 years. Will be in July. I'm the victim advocate team leader, and I'm also the staff supervisor for everyone except the therapist. And that's a little bit about me. Not much happening there.
Well, let's talk about something else for a moment that she doesn't, I didn't hear her say, that she is also the pastor of a church in New Bern.
Okay, so in other words, when it comes to dealing with people who are grieving, Sharia is in multiple places to be working with people who are grieving.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we were kind of wrapping up all the different life events that can bring us to the grief process, into that journey of grief. And of course, when I was in college, Hayley, took classes on psychology and social and behavioral things. Stages of grief were part of that whole classroom experience and learning the stages of grief. But Gail, you and Sharia, what kind of things do you use to help people, first of all, identify the stages of grief and then kind of work through that?
So I was, and I think Sharia took the same grief training recently that I took, and I believe Dr. Samuels was the presenter on the training, and I believe she taught us the Kubler-Ross model. And that would be denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so, you know, the best thing to do is aim for that acceptance. Just, unfortunately, you got to go through some hurdles before you get there.
I know, and the 5 stages aren't necessarily linear ever. They can feel like they're all at once, and you can jump from denial to bargaining to anger, or just anger. Like everyone's different, and everyone does each phase in their individual way. And I think it's good to normalize that it's okay to feel the way that you do about the grief, and to just kind of be kind to yourself during like those phases, and understand that this is normal part of being human, and that it will eventually get better.
And just as everyone experiences trauma in their own way, so too do people experience grief in their own way. There's no right or wrong way.
I completely agree.
I also believe, and I help people from different spectrums, that first they have to be able to be truthful about what they're feeling and what they're going through. Even if you're not sure why you're feeling it, but if you can identify or be truthful that, hey, something within me is causing me to hurt, and I can't really put my finger on it, but identifying that, you know, I need some assistance, I need some help and things, because it's hard to help individuals if they don't even believe that there's a concern or an issue or a problem. And so being patient, and sometimes just I start off a lot with just general conversation and help identify people where they are, and you can pick up for where that place, like Hayley, you were saying, they might be on an anger stage, and somebody else might have just came in a stage of depression, but really not know how to express how they feel. Communication, I think, is the biggest thing, and letting people know that that you're there, because a lot of people feel like they're just processing it by themselves and people don't understand. So I think those are good avenues. They've worked for me in the past to kind of help people to get through their stages of grief.
Let me ask you this question, just so that, you know, our folks that are listening, our students, faculty and staff who may be tuning in, just to pick up some nuggets from this conversation. Can you really help us understand what denial looks like when you're working with folks who are in denial? What does that look like, sound like when you're working with folks in that stage?
I'm okay. It happened. There's a big change, and I'm okay.
Okay. So denial can look like, yeah, you know what? It's just another day. Yeah, a lot of people have trouble with these types of things, but not me. I'm strong, and I'm good to go. I'm rolling with it.
Or just shut down. Or no, the news that my loved one passed is not true. They have my sister confused with somebody else.
I think it's almost like your brain's defense mechanism at first to kind of say like, no, this isn't happening. Like it's almost like a self-soothing thing to do, because it's your brain's just like, this can't be happening. Like this is a dream. I'm going to wake up. Like, so that's why I think denial makes sense as being the first stage, even though that's not necessarily always the case.
Sort of a protective factor.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's kind of what I tell myself, like, no, this isn't happening. Like, this isn't real.
So would you say denial can be a stage of unbelief?
Mm-hmm.
Consider that? A lot of people just don't believe it's to be.
Don't want to believe.
Yeah.
And again, if we wrap that in the context of, remember, we're not just talking about death, we're talking about many and multiple things that create change that we weren't maybe expecting, that we didn't ask for, that we don't feel we deserve, whatever our perception is of it. But yet, it's like, you know what? No, I'm not ready to deal with this yet. So yeah, it's not really happening, but I'm okay. Right? I'll get through it. And so,
Yeah.
I feel like that was kind of everyone's reaction to like COVID. Like no one believed it at first. No one really took it seriously until it was actually a problem. But that's like a good example of how our minds just go to, this isn't happening. Like this isn't real. Like it's not us. It's not our problem.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
it'll get back to you.
Mhm. Yeah.
So thank you with helping, when we say denial is a stage, and typically the first stage, shock and denial. And of course, I think everybody understands anger, when the whole anger response to it. Oftentimes we get angry. What underlies anger is fear. Oftentimes fear is right underneath anger.
Yeah.
And of course, things that we can't control, that makes us fearful and upset and angry. Bargaining. We talked about bargaining. Can we help our listeners understand what does bargaining really look like, sound like when we say bargaining is a stage?
Okay, well, I've done this myself. So I'm just going to speak from a personal experience. Dear God, if you will just make this not true, I will be the best person on the planet Earth. I will do anything and everything. I will give up anything and everything if you'll just make this not so.
I can so relate to that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think oftentimes bargaining is like, please God, just saying to the universe, like, please let this not be real. Or if I do this, then that earns me this. Or if I'll do this, please let this happen. So I think it's just like, again, another natural kind of mechanism we use to get through the process of grieving.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, Gail. Thanks for that personal example, because it's so genuine and it's so real, and that it really does capture what bargaining does sound like and look like. We're just trying to make a deal with God above or whoever that whatever I'll do whatever it takes to make this go away. Right?
Yes.
So, but again, it's really about a lot of things that we can't control. So, and we'll come back to acceptance, because acceptance is, we think it's at the end, but as you've mentioned, everybody can go through the loop of grief where we think we've gotten to acceptance, but then we find ourselves kind of looping back to one of the other stages. But can we talk about some of the other emotional symptoms of grief that people have? Obviously, we talked about anger. What are some of the other emotional, I guess, pools that we'll find ourselves swimming in for a while during the grief process?
So irritability would be one thing. Detachment, obsessing over the loss, whatever that may be. An inability to experience joy would also be one. Bitterness, numbness.
Anxiety.
Frustration.
So talk to me about this one, especially Sharia, from when you deal with parishioners. How about that guilt thing?
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
That seems to me a pretty big one that people kind of wrestle with, is that whole guilt thing that I must have done something to bring.
I had to do something wrong, the blame game, because you can't understand it, you can't process it, you don't have the answers that you need, and so it's easy to blame yourself for something that's gone wrong, because I can't really pinpoint what's happening, why it happened, how it happened. Even in this last couple of weeks, we had some things happen, and I couldn't wrap my brain around what was happening. And so the first thing I said was, did I do something wrong? Is this my fault? Could I have done something better? So people normally would, when they have to have some type of satisfaction, they would normally go to themselves. And if they have to have somebody to blame, it would normally be themselves.
Yeah, that's why I think that whole bargaining stage lends itself to guilt, because we've just made these promises. I'm going to be such a better person, and I'm going to do all these things to make amends and fix this and make it right somehow. And then when it doesn't end up the way we think it should or want it to be, then we do kind of end up with it must have been my fault, because I didn't do what I promised that I would do to make this all get better. And so I think those kind of couple up.
I think it's such an easy place to go to also, is like, I should have done this, I should have done that. And which is like kind of one of the hardest parts about like accepting grief, is because like, is knowing that maybe there is something you could have done, but like, regardless of that, like at this point, nothing can really change what you did, or you can't change the past. But those feelings of thinking like, I should have done this, I should have done that, I shouldn't have done that, or shouldn't have done this, like those can really keep a person up at night.
Well, we as humans, we have to make sense out of something. And when something goes wrong, there's got to be a blame to go somewhere.
There has to be a reason, or
yes,
a definitive reason.
And so we're all really good at placing the blame for something that's gone wrong. And so while we're thinking about, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to change this? How am I going to make this right? Then we start sinking inward and looking at, oh gosh, this is my fault. I should have done X, or I shouldn't have done Y. And the reality is Z would have happened anyway.
And I think sometimes we can jump to, like, at the same time as we're inwardly thinking, I should have done this, maybe I should have done that, or we're kind of outwardly trying to also place a blame on something else because we don't want it to be our fault. So it's kind of like a simultaneous reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're going to go through, that gambit of different emotions through the grief process. And sometimes I think people think of it as just this psychological process going through, the belief systems and the emotional systems and reactions and responses. But let us not forget that there are physical manifestations of grief. And let's talk about that for a minute. So what are some of the physical symptoms of that people may be experiencing when they go through grief?
So headache, dry mouth, chest pain, shortness of breath, stomach pain, nausea, loss of appetite, fatigue. Those are just a few off the top of my head.
Those are a few, but those are a few that can really slow a person down. I mean, that can change your day into a functional, productive day, into a day where I just need to stay at home and stay on the couch or in the bed or something. I mean, those can be pretty debilitating.
Yes.
And stress, like you're obviously undergoing a lot of stress at the time when you're grieving, and that stress correlates to inflammation, and like it can worsen any health problem that you may already have or cause new ones, such as headaches and shortness of breath. And also sometimes you lose your appetite oftentimes when you're grieving as well. So, and obviously not getting enough nutrients and food in your body, that's going to affect how your body kind of attacks sickness, and like it debilitates your immune system by not eating. So all of it plays a part.
And then sometimes it can go the other way, and you can overeat because we have emotional eaters. And so when the emotions are all stirred up, then there's that emotional eating that takes place.
Exactly. Comfort food.
Yes. And you know, we're in the South now, and that's how people comfort one another.
There's some
You know,
good food.
something goes wrong in your family, and the neighbors start bringing you food.
That's right.
It's very true.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to that tradition. Don't get me wrong. I'm not
I'm not
opposed.
opposed to it either. That's why they make stretchy pants.
You'll eat it eventually.
So let's make that comparison. So let's use the death of somebody. And you know, we've got that adrenaline, we've got that energy to get through preparations for the funeral, and then housing people and events and things. And then after everything kind of quiets back down, there's that crashing, right? There's that, it all just kind of settles in, and there's that kind of deep darkness, heaviness that we feel. But again, associate that to, you know, other life things where, you know, COVID comes in, or, you know, there's a breakup in a relationship and we push hard, you know, the job changes, we lose our job, or we have to change job. So we got this adrenaline to help get us through the front end, but there's going to be a back end eventually. And that's what we need to be aware of, because it will affect us emotionally and physically as well, just to be prepared for those stages of the response to grief, to change and loss.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So we've talked about this, and one of the myths are, right? You've heard this before. Hey, it's been 6 months. It's been a year. You know, we put a time frame on it, but tell us about a time frame. Is there a time frame?
No.
And when does it become complicated? Because there is such a thing as complicated grief, right? So when, as professional clinicians as you are, when do you start seeing that person, that grief is now manifested and transitioned into something a little more complicated? What are the signs that give you those clues?
So when there's preoccupation with the deceased person, when there's a preoccupation with the circumstances of that death, a persistent longing for the person who has passed, that would warrant some significant concern.
And as we talk about that, and looking and maybe reading into some of that is with the mental health issues of what we call major depression, where major depression can really shut you down.
Yes.
It can stop us from being able to function the way we normally function, to do our jobs, to take care of our families, and sometimes even to take care of ourselves when major depression gets that acute and intense. And the same with anxiety. People who may have panic attacks, you know, the anxiety begins to get so severe that they're having panic attacks now, and they're fearing. So they've had the one loss that will change their lives. Well, now what if there's even more? You know, what if things get even worse, and the anxiety goes to another level as well? And so we start looking for those mental health disorders that fall into the family of depression and anxiety, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. I know that we've all, well, Hayley, you're a bit young. Maybe you haven't heard this yet, but for the rest of us, we've heard someone say after they've lost a spouse, for example, I just want to go be with my wife, or I just want to go be with my husband. And that is really a clue. That person is inadvertently asking for help, or maybe subconsciously asking for help when they make a statement like that.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, COVID has really brought that whole dynamic in reality. The stories that I've heard, folks, especially in the geriatric population, who'd been married 40, 50, 60 years.
Yes.
And then their spouse, was lost to COVID, and then days, sometimes weeks, but oftentimes just days, and the spouse passes as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
And those stories have been multiple that I've tuned into and reminded me at that stage in life, that grief can be real intense, very intense for those folks. All right, so we've got to lighten this mood, folks. We got to bring some light back into this dark discussion.
Well, let's do that.
So let's talk about grief as really a process, not that we'll ever look forward to it, that we'll ever master it, that we'll ever become professionals at it, but really let's talk about acceptance and how that can signify or mean for us this process of growing and becoming something else, kind of the butterfly that comes out of the cocoon.
Yeah.
And gives us that sense of hope, that sense of resilience, that when we go through difficult times, struggles, loss, trauma, but that we survive, and that we find things out about ourselves and others around us that give us that sense of hope and comfort and peace that we need to get through. So talk to us. This is the lighter side of the grief conversation. Talk to us about some of that, whether it's personal or that you've seen other people really grow as individuals through the grief process.
So mine probably is more of a faith-based sort of situation. When I lost my dad, he had suffered from dementia for quite a while, and he hadn't recognized me in quite a while, nor did he recognize any of my siblings who weren't with him on a daily basis, which I think there were just one of my sisters had moved into the home to care for he and my stepmother, because my stepmother was bedbound, but sharp as a tack. Daddy was mobile, but had dementia. And so I felt like I had already lost him because he didn't know me when I went to visit. And so I had been back there several days, been to the funeral home a couple of times, but the day of the funeral was when it really sunk in that my daddy was gone. I wouldn't be able to go visit him anymore, even though he didn't know who I was. And that was very difficult for me. And I called back here, in fact, to speak to my pastor. And she said to me, Gail, the resurrection reconciles all things. And it was like all I needed was to hear that, and it was okay. Daddy was gone, and it was okay. Strange, but it can be very simple. It can be complex. But when the acceptance comes, you'll know.
That's true. And it definitely comes in waves. I feel like whenever, like, you could be fine one day or 1 second, and then you're in a ball of tears the next. And, you were like, I was doing so good. Like, I thought I was moved on. And one of like my all-time favorite quotes related to death or loss is, you don't move on from death or loss you simply move forward from it. And I think that's kind of a more comforting way to put it, because I think saying moving on is almost like insinuating like time to forget, or kind of like a pressure that like I'm not over this, and it puts a pressure on somebody like I should be accepted, I should have accepted this already, like, and you're still not at that point. So I think if you say moving forward with it, it's still, because like your dad, like he'll always be a part of you, and so you've moved forward from that. You haven't moved on from your dad's death. Like that's impossible. So I think it's so much better to say you're moving forward, because obviously he's going to come with you as you grow, and he's always going to be with you spiritually. So I've always loved that quote.
I'm a little quiet because, see, I'm just coming out of this process. We had 4 deaths with COVID all within 4 months. And we were all aunts and uncles, and they were older. And before you can process one, you had another. And before you can process that one, before you have more. But as it settled, I'm a bit with Gail a little bit. Once I was able to process all of it, I didn't understand why it all happened the way it happened, but it wasn't for me to understand. I had to just go back to what I believed in my roots and what I knew, and that, you know, we all have to go this way at one point. And one of the things that helped me when accept it is that I will always listen wherever I am, because I have the memories, I have the things they taught me, I have the laughs. You know, we even have the whoopings, you know, the things, the correction. We had, but all of these things were good. There were memories, and it brought me joy. And so when I cannot just focus on the darkness of it, I saw the light out of it. And I think when we get to a point where everything that happens is not just for us to be stuck in the darkness. It's also some light at the end of the tunnel. And those things helped me by accepting, and then being around loved ones and family, and we can cry and embrace with one another. You know, I believe that for some people like me, I don't need to be isolated through a time when I'm trying to accept it, because then I have all these other negative things that come my way. So for me, my acceptance was remembering they wasn't suffering anymore. They're in a better place. They're probably better than where I am. And take the legacy of what they left for us, and I carry that with me. Hayley talked about, you know, we're not leaving them behind, but I'm taking them every day. I have a piece of them with me, you know, so they're encouraging words. And that was my way of accepting the loss of 4 loved ones back to back due to a pandemic, something we couldn't control, but we don't know how we're going to go. We don't know the time, nor do we know the hour. And then I had to think of good things, like it could have been worse. It could have been another way. It could have been a violent crime, or, you know, so I had to think about the positive and not so much the negative. And that's what helped me with acceptance.
Yeah, I think it's important to celebrate their lives as much as it is to mourn it as well. Because, I mean, you love them, obviously, so you want to remember the good things and the bad things. Like, it's all a part of your memories with that person. So I think it's important to celebrate their life as well and keep them.
And I think that's how we support one another through grief, is to reminisce about those times that we had.
And that makes you always feel so much better, to me anyways, is just talking about the good times like you had with that person. And
Because when you talk about things, you don't hold them in. When you hold stuff in, that's when you go back to one of them stages of anger or denial. So, you know, I think more when you talk about things, or when we cry, it's not necessarily a sad cry, it can be a joyful cry, you know. So when we have some type of release, that's also a form of acceptance.
I know sometimes I think one mechanism of going through grief is kind of like isolating yourself. And I can see that because in a way you don't really want to put your grief onto other people and kind of just be, you don't want that pity almost. But I think if you were to talk about it and to just tell anybody, someone, a random person, doesn't even matter who it is, just like get those feelings out is so much of a relief. And like you don't even realize until you've just got it all out. Like I love crying. Like I don't cry a lot, but I'm saying like I think it's a great, like you just feel so much better and like a weight's off your shoulder. And that's how I think like talking to a mental health professional is so important, because you just don't even realize how much like you carry on your shoulders like day to day. So definitely I don't recommend isolating yourself, regardless of how you feel about whether it's putting kind of your grief onto somebody else.
So let me check for understanding here and try to connect some dots through our conversation. But I told you time would fly. We've already passed 45-minute mark, believe it or not. But so grief is going to come in lots of different ways, in shapes and forms. It's not just death, which is the first thing we typically think of. There's divorce and breakups, there's jobs and there's moving, and then there's pandemics that hit. And so there's friends that move away. I mean, it can come. We haven't even talked about pets. Goodness gracious, how many people have pets that are like family members, and the grief that people experience when something happens to a pet. So, I mean, it just goes on and on, the different types of things, people, pets, situations that represent our identity, the things that bring us safety and comfort and joy and peace. When those things change, when we lose them, when something is altered, we're going to go through this grief process. There's going to be that emotional journey. There's going to be the stages. There's going to be physical symptomology, physical reactions as well. And we have to be patient with each other. We have to be patient with ourselves, because there is no prescribed time frame for this grief journey, this grief process. And that acceptance that comes, it's kind of like, it's that healing, it's that catharsis, it's that, you know what, I have found, you know, my voice again. I found myself again. I found my peace, my comfort, my joy. I found that again. And boy, does it feel good. But you know what? I may wake up the next day and find myself struggling again with one of those stages, and I'm just going to keep pressing forward. I think forward is the key word that we used. I think for those who are listening, how do you help people who are grieving? It is by listening. I mean, listening is the biggest thing. The shoulds, you know, that we always say, avoid the shoulds, right? You would never should on yourself, so you never should on somebody else either, right? Tell people what they should be doing, how they should be better, how they should be moving on. We avoid the shoulds, and we listen, and we encourage, and we show patience and understanding and compassion as people go through this transition and change. Gail, I see you wanted to say something.
I do. Hayley has a couple of grief support resources within the community that this might be a good time to throw out for folks who are listening.
Yes. One is the Seminary United Methodist Church, and right now they're doing a virtual grief support, so you can sign up through that online. And there's also Temple Baptist Church. They do a grief share program with a Christian perspective, and they also provide a social worker if you would prefer a different way of sharing your grief. And then there's also Newport Hospice, who does bereavement support services.
Awesome. And that's one thing we try to do through our counseling department here at the college. Obviously with Promise Place, you know, that's another whole segment in and of itself. how we connect and partner with our community resources. And, you know, New Bern and the surrounding area, we have a plethora of support resources, of therapeutic resources, clinical and professional resources. So go to our website anytime you're looking you know, for links to the resources in our community for lots of different things. And we appreciate our relationship with Promise Place and all that you've provided for our students, past, but current and present, as we continue to move forward. Because what we know is that stress, mental health, grief, it's going to be a part of our human journey. We're all going to experience it. And the great thing is you don't have to go it alone. If you've got great people around you, that's wonderful. But there are people in our community who know how to be supportive and how to listen and how to help identify our way through, whether it's a mental health struggle or a grief journey or anything in that capacity. So friends, I appreciate you being in the community and doing what you do. And if you know, any last words, does anybody want to kind of say anything before we kind of sign off today?
Thank you for having us today and letting us participate with you.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been an awesome opportunity.
You know, we talk about our family, and then we talk about our work family, and you guys are our community family. And it's just nice to know that you have people like you out there that are part of what we're trying to do to support those who are getting their educations and at the same time going through struggles and challenges of life. So we appreciate everybody, what you do. Good luck to you, Hayley, with your continued educational journey, and Sharia and Gail with what you guys are doing. Appreciate y'all. And hey, we'll do this again another time, and we'll talk about something else.
Okay, thanks a bunch.
Bill, good seeing you.
Good seeing you.
Bye, everyone.